Hello, everybody. So we have the part 3 now. After the Wing Gambit, I wanted to talk about the safe Wing Gambit, which is called also Mengarini line or variation. So let's check it out. Let's see how the things will go here in this variation. So the move is e4, c5, and then pawn a3. Just to remind you that after b4, White's main plan was to sacrifice the pawn, take the center after d4, or do another exchange like this and play the following line, but you can find it in part 2, Wing Gambit, like how to respond as black. So the move a3 is done to play like safe Wing Gambit with the move pawn b4. For example, let's say we will do something passive as black, d6, pawn b4, captures. Later on, White will push the pawn to d4. This bishop can go and be fianchetto and then eventually attack the pawn on g7. The other pawn can go to c4 as well, and White will have lots of pawns on the 4th rank. We'll take almost all the squares on our side on the 5th rank, and we can get some issues. So remember what I said, that when you see something strange, even if the variation is not strange, this can work as well. Try to understand what the plan is of your opponent and try to take it out from the core. That's the most annoying way. The other way is to create your own counterplay, which is quite interesting as well. And I'm going to give you some interesting options how to play as black. So there are moves such as knight c6. There is a move pawn to g6. We'll talk about this in the end, in order to not allow this bishop to get to b2. And also the move pawn to d5, which is interesting. Sure, we can play some other moves as well, like pawn to e6, pawn to d6, pawn knight c6, and b6, etc., knight f6 as well. But I'm going to talk about these 3 options today, and let's try to understand what's going on. I want to start with the move pawn knight to c6, not pawn e6, knight to c6. It seems that we will stop the move b4, but this will bring us to much sharper game, and I want to do everything in order to avoid it, because for the opponents who play the Wing Gambit or Mengarini, I think that they will be quite familiar with this move and with such positions, and they will be ready to do the next move, which is pawn b4. They will do the sacrifice. Sure, there are some lines as black, like pawn d5 here, knight f6, but I just want to show you that knight c6 can be a bit risky. This is why we want to avoid it. C takes b4, a takes b4, knight b4. Yeah, sure, we got a pawn, everything seems great, but then White plays pawn c3, the knight goes back, and then pawn to d4. So for the sacrifice pawn, White wants some tempos, and the pawns are in the center. The pawn structure is very powerful for White's side. Let's try to understand some lines which can show the potential from White's side, so we'll try to avoid it. For example, the move d5. Seems pretty natural. Let's try to fight for the center, but then takes, knight to a3. This idea is represented a lot in the Alapin variations. We'll talk about it later. The knight wants to jump to b5 and eventually reach to the c7 square and do the triple fork. So, for example, knight f6, a bit inaccurate move. Suddenly knight b5, and White's position is almost winning. According to the engine, the best move is king to d8. What happens after queen d8, you will ask? If bishop to f4, then we have knight d5. But all of a sudden, White plays d5 here. Very powerful move, attacking the knight. If knight goes back, then bishop to f4. If knight goes to e5, again bishop to f4, a7 is hanging, queen d4 is possible, can be some other moves as well. And if, of course, knight captures d5, you can stop for 10 seconds or so, try to understand what to do as White. Now I'm going to show the move. Again, a very cool idea, which is actually quite common here, is the move queen captures to d5. We're trying to take this queen out from the d8 square, and then we will do the triple fork. And after king d8, knight takes d5. White got an extra piece. Black has only 2 pawns, but the problem is that Black's pieces are not developed. The king is not in a safe position, so the position is nearly lost. Again, just to show you the potential from White's side, what can happen. Another move is pawn e6, knight f3, Again, we can play like d6, bishop b5, and then bishop d7, short castle. White has a good compensation here. The game is unclear, or we can say about equal. So knight f3 and then d5. We want to try to close the center, and after e5 we will get some kind of French defense, but white can play the move knight d2, try to remain it open. For example, d takes and then knight e4. This knight is strong, the bishop jumps here, the bishop to d3, the knights later can jump to g5, both of them, the other knight can jump to e5 as well. And if we play knight f6, pawn e5, knight d7, bishop d3. Seems that the game is pretty close. Black needs to be quite safe, but let's understand that white has a very powerful pawn chain. This bishop on c8 is very bad. This is very similar to the French defense. I love French defense, but French defense players know that c8 bishop is their usual main issue in those positions, and here it's very hard to bring it out. And after bishop to e7, white can do short castle, but there is a very interesting move, pawn to h4, with the idea to bring the knight to g5, rook to h3. Sure, we will not do the castle, we'll try to bend the rules a bit in order to create a powerful game as white. Again, for those players who want to play Mengarini or Wing as white, this can be quite interesting way. And if short castle, then we can see that white has some potential over here, and one of the main thematic moves as a sacrifice in the middle game positions when the bishop looks to h7 square, the knight is quite close and the queen can be open, is the move bishop takes h7, the Greek gift. This is a bit different compared to the classic Greek gift, but can work very well. King to h7 and then knight g5 check. The main idea is to bring the queen to h5, using the fact that the knight can't jump back to f6. Later on in the strategical lessons, we will talk about the Greek gift, or tactical lessons. So takes, knight g5, let's say king h6. White has too many ways to play. There is move queen g4 immediately, just knight f3. The Stockfish also recommended knight to e4. It was, I believe, the second line. Just wanted to show that even this can work. Takes and then queen g4. White has too many pieces around the king. Definitely knight takes f7 or knight e6 was pretty strong too, with the double check, taking the queen. But white can try to play for a win. It's very hard to escape with this king, and probably it's going to be a checkmate or big material losses for black. Maybe the queen, or even more to save the king on h6. It's kind of trapped. So this is the potential for an attack. If black plays h6 instead of short castle, pawn h6, then rook h3. Again, in such close positions, there is no need to do a castle immediately from white side. The white's king can be very safe on f1, and the rook can jump to g3 later on. After short castle, knight f1 is pretty strong, with rook g3 plan, bishop sacrifices on h6. Later on, knight g5, queen h5. This queen can jump to g4 as well. There are lots of things that white can do. Just as an example, for example, here, rook g3, this is not a line from the Stockfish, but from the personal experience for such typical positions. Then kaboom, bishop captures h6, g takes h6, and then, for example, queen d2. This is a checkmate, bishop g5, h takes g5. Now the material is equal, but a look at black's king, look at black's pieces, everything is just lost. So this is why I want to avoid the move knight c6, just to not allow white to play the move b4. Okay, now let's try to understand the second option, the move pawn to d5. For those who follow the World Cup nowadays, this move can be quite interesting to play, especially if you cheer for Norway, because this has similar vibes to the Scandinavian, variation. So we will try to take out the pawn on e4 and then queen takes d5, but still the knight can go to c3. This can attack our queen, and after queen d8, knight f3, knight c6, white's position can be just a bit better, although we control the center a bit more, like bishop b5. Now it's very important to not allow this capture, because knight f6, knight e5, or even bishop takes, these pawns are very weak. That's why we play bishop d7 to not allow that. Short castle, knight f6, because white will try to capture in order to push the pawn to d4 or bring the knight to e5. This is why we don't play a6. There's no need to attack the bishop yet. So takes, knight e5. Again, white wants to capture the bishop on c6 and double our pawn, so both of them will be isolated and weak, particularly the pawn on c5. Again, all of this will be covered in strategical lessons much later. So now queen goes to c7, white can push the pawn to d4, and we answer back with rook d8, or if white goes like rook e1, then we play e6. We will try to develop the dark squared bishop either to e7 or to d6, and the rook goes to d8, and then we will do castle as well. The position should be about equal. But again, this is for the players who want to play the Scandinavian. For example, you're a Scandinavian opening player or defense player, and you want to learn the Sicilian. All of a sudden, you got this. You can play d5. It's not that bad. For those who want to be the most annoying, I think the pawn g6 will be very good. So the main idea is to not allow the bishop to get to b2. And you want to prevent white to do their usual plan. Still, they can play the move pawn b4. We'll talk about the move knight c3 later on. So pawn to b4. And then we do bishop to g7. Now the rook is under attack, or rook a2 will not make much sense. So knight c3. And here we have lots of options as black. We can play the move pawn to d6. And if white captures, we take back, and then knight f6, check, bishop d7. Again, I don't want to do this, because I will get those double pawns. The pawn on c5 can become a weakness later on, especially if it will be blocked somehow. So bishop d7, short castle, a4, knight c6, and later on I'll try to get to the d4 square with the knight. If this bishop will escape, then takes. If the bishop will escape to c4 or a2, maybe bishop g4, try to exchange the defender of the d4 square, and then the knight will jump to d4. So this position is quite good. Another way to play is pawn b6. If we want to remain as many pawns closer to the center as possible, rook b1, just knight c6. We're not scared of b5 because the knight will jump to d4, and a black's position is totally fine. Now, from here, usually you will like switch to some other Sicilian lines, like the close Sicilian with bishop c4, close Sicilian with the fianchetto with g3. So for example, bishop to g7, knight c3, let's say b6, rook b1 here, then g3, and let's say e6, bishop g2, knight e7, or bishop rook b8, let's say. So we will talk about such positions later, because the pawn structure is going to be leaning more towards, you know, those opening line areas. So after the move bishop g7, knight c3, d6, or b6, everything is fine. This is why white can play immediate knight c3, but you know, we will have a success because he didn't do the move b4. So I can play bishop g7 again. After b4, same d6 or b6. It's going to be a transposition. If white does g3, we're going to play close Sicilian, like knight c6, bishop g2, pawn e6 with the move a3, which can be useful for white, but this is our usual close Sicilian, and we will be ready for that. Or white is going to play the bishop c4, close Sicilian this way. Again, a3 is useful, so the bishop can escape, but in some positions it can be useless as well, because maybe white wants to spend a tempo on something else. Or he goes like f4, here, knight e7, and short castle. We will have so-called Grand Prix attack. Again, we will talk about it. So after d3, d5, this bishop can jump back to a2, but there are lots of positions where white wants the pawn on a4, or, you know, do some other move. That's why a3 maybe will not be the best continuation there. The most important thing is that after a3, g6, we're trying to do everything to prevent his usual plan. Again, chess is a psychological war as well. It's not only just, you know, learning the openings. We need to try to get into our opponent's mind, try to understand what he wants to do, why they do like certain moves. So if he wants to play like safe wing gambit with the move b4 and then bishop b2 and then attack on the king side, or sacrifice that pawn and get the center, let's prevent it. So instead of just trying to allow all of that, because it's not that bad for white side. So pawn to g6 with the idea to play bishop g7. So this will conclude the third part of the Sicilian. I hope all of you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, write down your comments. I'll be happy to see, what's going on in the comment section and answer to your questions. So I'll see you in the next part. Cheers, everyone.